Stand up.
Well, hello. Welcome to the show. I'm very happy that you stopped by. I've got a great conversation with my friend Eric Segall joining me today that starts at 19 minutes. And I'm going to be dropping several interviews between now and Monday because I'm headed out to Vegas and I want to do as much Nevada-related stuff while I'm there. And I've got these great interviews that I've just taped in the last 2 days. So look for them dropping on Friday, Saturday, and even Sunday. Great talks with great guests, as always here. That is the hallmark, the trademark, the thing that we do here at Stand Up, most importantly. We also have a great community of people who love to hang out virtually. And thank you to all of those of you who joined me last night, taping this before the hangout so I can get it up and ready for you. But I'm sure we had a great time. All right, well, I've got your headlines and your clips, even here on a Friday with the hangout bearing down on me. So let's get to it right now. We woke up this morning, if we had forgotten for a moment, to be reminded of the horrible shooting at a Georgia high school. Police found evidence the 14-year-old student accused of opening fire yesterday at his Georgia high school and killing 4 people was interested in mass shootings. Officials said he appeared to be particularly obsessed with the 2018 massacre at a high school in Parkland, Florida, and it brings up the very difficult and impossible to navigate issue about how we cover these horrible shootings, whether we should be covering them at all. Certainly not the way that we do, but how does that ever change? Law enforcement officials said to have interviewed the teenager more than a year ago about online school shooting threats, but were unable to definitively link those threats to him. So we've learned, of course, more about the shooting and the victims, and it is just horrifying. I'm not going to go into it here in the headlines, but I highly recommend you read more about the 2 students and 2 teachers who were shot dead at the high school there in Winder, Georgia. And if you can't, I don't blame you for that either. And the only other detail I would mention is that the father of the kid who committed the horrible violent act apparently told investigators that he purchased the gun as a holiday present for his son. So it was, of course, an AR-15 style gun, which is almost always used in these shootings. Wednesday's mass shooting was the 45th school shooting so far this year and the deadliest U.S. school shooting since March 2023 massacre at the Covenant School in Nashville that left 6 people dead. All right, that's all I've got to say about that for today. Let's see, not the most important story unless you're the New York Times who put it up top. Hunter Biden entered a guilty plea in federal case avoiding a trial. He pled guilty to federal tax charges. The judge accepted his plea. In Nigeria, Boko Haram, the terrorist group, is said to have killed at least 170 villagers in a northeastern community, leaders said, in what was probably one of the deadliest attacks in recent years. In Iraq, a UN team that had been working to document the genocide of the country's Yazidis had been ordered to leave by the government. Interested in reading more about that. Nicaragua, the government released 135 political prisoners, including 13 people affiliated with the American Evangelical Church on humanitarian grounds. In Russia, the U.S. Justice Department indicted an American commentator for Russian television as part of an effort to crack down on Russian attempts to influence the American election campaign. And in New Zealand, the Maori people named the 27-year-old daughter of their late king to be their new monarch, a symbolic but weighty role. In France, the president, Emmanuel Macron, appointed Michael Barnier, a veteran right-wing politician, as the country's new prime minister. And back here at home, a federal judge placed a temporary hold on another component of President Biden's student debt relief plan. A ceasefire between Israel and Hamas is not close, according to Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, rejecting U.S. optimism over a deal and saying his red lines have become redder in the wake of the killing of the 6 hostages in Gaza. Speaking a day after senior Biden administration officials said a deal had been 90% agreed, Netanyahu told the Fox and Friends morning show that was exactly inaccurate. President Joe Biden is returning to southwest Wisconsin to make good on his promise to provide new investments in rural electrification and other infrastructure improvements. President Biden was there yesterday to announce a $7.3 billion investment for 16 co-ops that will provide electricity for rural areas across 23 states. The intent is to bring down the cost of badly needed electricity connections in hard-to-reach areas. How about that? Joe Biden, the Democrat, doing as much to help rural areas as any president. Come on now. Attorney General Ken Paxton of Texas went to court Wednesday to try to stop county leaders in San Antonio from sending out more than 200,000 voter registration applications to unregistered residents of Bexar County because registering people to vote in Texas is bad. And the State Freedom Caucus Network is holding its first summit this week in Dallas, bringing together a dozen state freedom caucuses that represent their legislators, hardline conservative Republicans. Veteran GOP strategist who serves as the president of the network, a guy named Andy Roth, said the summit demonstrates how the conservative principles of the House Freedom Caucus have spread to legislatures across the U.S. I would say it's not conservative principles, but conspiracy theories more than anything else. All right, those are your headlines for yesterday. Let's get to the clips that I've gathered for you. Let's start with this idiot former governor of New Hampshire, Chris Sununu, who was a surrogate for Nikki Haley, and then he flipped and became one for Donald Trump, which is hard to believe that the Cheney family name has gotten a little better, and the Sununu family name up in New Hampshire, a political dynasty there, is only gotten worse. Here he is.
Whose plan are you liking, and what really speaks to you in your state? What will work with voters there?
So, again, when we talk about the voters, we're talking about that 8 to 10% of swing voters, right? Those are the ones that are still up for play and probably will be through October. It's not the economy. It's cost of living. And those voters are going to be swayed by who is the change agent, right? Who is the individual? Is it Kamala Harris or is it Donald Trump that'll be an agent of change to make my life more affordable? It's not about the number of jobs that are created. People have jobs. They just want things to be affordable again, and that's it. And between now and November 5th, the rent comes due, right, on the 1st. The credit card bills keep coming in. The energy bills the electric bills keep coming in. There's a lot of costs American families are going to have, and that's the anxiety, right? Anxiety is what drives someone to go to the voting booth and ask for change. And Americans still have a lot of anxiety, especially with an impending recession, which is very real. And there's no question Donald Trump is always going to be more trusted as someone that's been on the front lines in business, can actually speak to details. Through all the personality challenges that a lot of us know and accept that he has, it's results that people want. Only new results are going to bring the change to kind of lower the temperature in their families and give them more economic freedom. And that's what it's about, not the global economy.
All right, that's enough from Chris Sununu. How about a palate cleanser? Let's go to the governor of Minnesota and the vice presidential candidate, Tim Walz.
So it doesn't surprise me that Donald Trump did not do a damn thing on Labor Day. He took the day off, which he should thank organized labor for that day off. If I were him, I would be hiding down in Mar-a-Lago, too. I wouldn't want to face working people. I wouldn't want to look them in the eye and tell them why their work doesn't matter, why it should be harder to unionize, why he and his folks have undermined middle America. Look, people are angry for a reason. And this Project 2025 thing, I got to tell you, they're trying to run from it. They continue to try and deny it. But here's what I've said very simply on this. I coached football for enough years to know if you take the time to make a playbook, you're going to use it. You're going to use it. So they took the time to do it. And I will say this. J.D. Vance talks about being from... Look, he should know. He talks about where he came from. He talks about where he was at. But I'll have to tell you, he did say this. He said there's a lot of angst and people are angry in middle America. Hell, yes, we are, because people like him gutted middle America. The bankers and the robber barons gutted middle America. They shipped our jobs out. So look, you go off to Yale, you get a philosophy major, you write a best-selling book, trash the very people you grew up with. Just don't come back to Erie and tell us how to run our lives. Don't do that. Don't do that.
Yeah, Tim Walz campaigning yesterday in Erie, Pennsylvania. Good stuff from him. And now I'm going to play for you the disgraced former president. So trigger alert, this is a 2-minute clip, but he took questions at the Economic Club of New York. And one of the questions was, how will he make childcare more affordable? And everybody's talking about this because of his answer or non-answer or word salad, as it's being called. So if you can't deal with this, fast forward 2 minutes. Otherwise, enjoy.
If you win in November, can you commit to prioritizing legislation to make childcare affordable? And if so, what specific piece of legislation will you advance?
Well, I would do that, and we're sitting down. I was we had Senator Marco Rubio, and my daughter Ivanka was so impactful on that issue. It's a very important issue, but I think when you talk about the kind of numbers that I'm talking about, that because look, childcare is childcare. There's something, you have to have it. In this country, you have to have it. But when you talk about those numbers compared to the kind of numbers that I'm talking about by taxing foreign nations at levels that they're not used to, but they'll get used to it very quickly. And it's not going to stop them from doing business with us, but they'll have a very substantial tax when they send product into our country. Those numbers are so much bigger than any numbers that we're talking about, including childcare, that it's going to take care. We're going to have, I look forward to having no deficits within a fairly short period of time, coupled with the reductions that I told you about on waste and fraud and all of the other things that are going on in our country, because I have to stay with childcare. I want to stay with childcare, but those numbers are small relative to the kind of economic numbers that I'm talking about, including growth, but growth also headed up by what the plan is that I just told you about. We're going to be taking in trillions of dollars, and as much as child care is talked about as being expensive, it's relatively speaking not very expensive compared to the kind of numbers we'll be taking in. We're going to make this into an incredible country that can afford to take care of its people, and then we'll worry about the rest of the world. Let's help other people. But we're going to take care of our country first. This is about America first. It's about make America great again. We have to do it because...
All right, it makes no sense. He didn't say anything. Except for that childcare wasn't that expensive. So he's getting crushed for that comment. And, well, specifically this one. He said global warming isn't our problem. Just 20 more seconds.
We have to be very, very careful because the destructive capability of nuclear, when people talk about global warming, I say the ocean is going to go down 1/100th of an inch within the next 400 years. That's not our problem. Our problem is nuclear warming, and we better be smart.
Okay, so that doesn't make any sense at all. Nuclear energy accident, or nuclear war is obviously a realistic problem. It's existential, but so is climate change. And the ocean is going to go down? What? It's all he's talked about. Okay, well, I don't really have to comment on that. You all know that that's absolutely crazy. Here is President Biden, who I mentioned went to Wisconsin to fulfill that promise. Here he is there.
More opportunities in rural communities. Let's remember, my predecessor promised you that he would redevelop Foxconn factory in Racine. You been there lately? He didn't do a damn thing. Nothing. More opportunities in rural communities.
All right, let's go to Fox and Friends, where I mentioned the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu went on to say, no deal. We have no deal.
Hamas is not there with a deal. There's not a deal in the making, unfortunately. And that still hasn't happened. They want to reconstitute their terror kingdom, and unfortunately it's not close. But we'll do everything we can to get them to the point where they do make a deal, and at the same time we prevent Iran from resupplying Gaza as this great terror enclave right next to Tel Aviv, right next to our major cities.
Mr. Prime Minister, what do you say to critics who say that you're extending this conflict in order to stay in power? That it's for your political gain for this to go on. What's your reaction to that?
I'm not interested in my political future. I'm interested in my country's future. This war would be over yesterday if Hamas laid down its arms, released all the hostages. It'll be over in 2 seconds.
Oh, right. Well, he's lying. He only cares about his own interests, which is why hundreds of thousands of his own people are in the street demanding that he resign and probably go to jail. All right, let's listen to, this is over on CNBC. They had the NBA superstar Steph Curry on, and they asked him, because he's a businessman now, and he made a surprise appearance, of course, at the DNC last month to deliver a very emphatic endorsement of the vice president. But the co-anchor played a clip of his appearance at DNC, asked him why it was important to endorse Harris. And the other anchor follows up by asking if Curry's business plans give him pause when deciding to make the appearance, which is kind of a stupid question, but here it is.
What about we made a surprise appearance at the DNC that I wanted to ask you about, endorsing Kamala Harris. I think we do have a clip of it, if we could just play.
What's up, everybody? Stephen Curry here. I know you all know I played for the Golden State Warriors, but man, what a great honor it was to represent Team USA and go out there and win that gold medal at the Olympics this summer. And that unity on and off the court reminded us all that together we can do all things and continue to inspire the world. That's why I believe that Kamala, as president, could bring that unity back and continue to move our country forward. This is about preserving hope and belief in our country, making sure families can be taken care of during their most precious times.
What was the reaction to that, and why was that so important for you to do?
The reaction was great. There's also obviously a lot of noise in terms of anytime you step into this lane, it's going to be received, in a lot of different ways. And for me, it's all about creating conversations that are about being decent human beings, first and foremost. I think we've lost that a little bit to where, obviously, endorsing Kamala is important for me, for my family.
Why? What are the issues you care about most?
Say what?
What are the issues you care about?
I just know from, especially women's rights and thinking about, what's at stake with this election, and understanding, we need to be in a position where women have the right to choose what's right for them. And that's at the top of the list for me. I have amazing women in my life who've been a huge inspiration to me. But knowing Kamala and having been around her, and I understand she's qualified for this job. She's, I think, representing what it means to be a great leader and being a decent human being in terms of representing our country the right way. So it's an easy choice for me, but to be able to have be in a situation where you can be a part of the DNC, do a video like that, let people know where I feel like, but foster positive conversations, through it all. I think that's what our country needs.
All right. Well, there you go. Forget the rest of it. That was awesome. Steph Curry is great. And I mean, I don't know much about him, but whenever a professional athlete as prominent as him, who has a lot to lose, comes out and does the right thing and says the right thing like that, it seems easier to do, less courageous now when obviously the guy that she's running against is a fascist who doesn't believe in democracy, also a racist and a rapist. Doesn't seem that hard or that brave, but I'll give him credit. I'll give him the credit he deserves. All right, there you go, Steph Curry. Now let's end with some jokes, shall we? Colbert was back on CBS with The Late Show last night, and here is a little laughter for you.
Looking at here, how far away? We are mere what? 62 days from the election, so mark your calendars and share your Xanax, because as of today, this race is neck and whatever this is. Can we show this on CBS? Thank you. Harris is leading in most national polls, which is nice, but the swing states remain very, very close. And an average of 15% of likely voters say they have not firmly decided their choice. How is that possible? Honey, I can't decide. For vacation, should we go to the Four Seasons Resort in Anguilla or Dan's Shed O'Marmot's? Remember we stayed at Dan's Shed O'Marmot's for 4 years? Why did we leave? Trump and Harris are both trying to woo these undecided voters, but they're targeting different groups out there. For example, Harris is reportedly going after women of every stripe, or as J.D. Vance calls them, witch! Women shouldn't have stripes. Women should have babies. All those stripes make it hard for me to find them in the tall grass. Kamala is also trying to reach young voters. That is so important. I am also reaching out to young people, mostly to ask, how do you do that thing on Uber where you add a stop?
All right, there you go. Colbert last night, he's back. This week they all were, and that is all I've got for you in headlines and clips. Let's get to my conversation with Eric Segall, which is a real conversation, a back and forth. It's more politics and behavior and some different things that we talked about in terms of how the media should be covering the election, as well as what it's like for him to deal with first-year law students who are Trump supporters. I thought this is great. I think it's always great. Most of you love my conversations with Eric Segall. You can follow him at eSpinSegall. Let him know he was here. You heard him on the show. You don't have to let him know he was here. He knows that he was here. He's not that old. He's doing great. Loved it. Although he was sitting there with his sling. Just recently had shoulder surgery. Listen to his podcast, Supreme Myths. Support him everywhere you can, as he always has me. Here it is right now. There he is, the legal eagle. Eric Segall joins us now, and I have been a good friend. I have not checked up on you much since the surgery. I did right after the surgery, but you had a big shoulder surgery. Are you okay? We need you to be okay.
I'm doing better. I'm 66 with a brand new shoulder that's 3 weeks old. Most of the pain is gone. It's still uncomfortable. I get my sling off in a week, and then I'll be back to normal. Then 4 months of physical therapy, which might be interesting because that'll put me in a bad mood, Pete. And if you get me on a good day in a bad mood, all kinds of fun can be happening. As you know, as your audience knows from hundreds of previous episodes.
I would never wish it on you, but we love good content. Okay. Now,
I will say for the crowd out there, I'm going to talk about two big issues today, two things happening to me. And I am a little sleep deprived, a little moody, and a little upset. So it may get a little bit rough, but we'll see.
Well, are you doomy or just gloomy?
I'm less doomy than I was a month ago by 80%.
Sure. Yeah, let's talk maybe a little bit about how that's changed, too, if we have time. But first, I just have to ask you, I know you've had a lot of Donald Trump related people and issues in your life. What has happened?
I have two things going on right now in my life. One today, and maybe one next couple of days, both of which are only because Donald Trump is the worst person in the universe. Okay. So here's what happened. And I think I'm free to talk about this, but you know what, Pete? I'm 66. I've had my career. If I get fired, I get fired. I had a student contact me a while back who had a very interesting idea that I think your audience will also find interesting in theory, unfortunately not in practice. He suggested to me that he was a Republican and was generally conservative, but did not want to be associated with or part of the Federalist Society, which of course has a big chapter at my school, just like the American Constitution Society has a big chapter at my school. So I said, okay, that sounds good. That talked to me about maybe being the advisor for the group. We haven't resolved that yet. But the idea of a group of Republicans and conservatives separate from the Federalist Society made me feel good. They then invited me to a happy hour. I said yes, but I had to cancel. They then invited me to a happy hour. I said yes, but I had to cancel. Today, we are taping this at 2:15 on Tuesday. At 4 o'clock, I will be at a happy hour with this group. Except after class last week, a student came up to me and said, looking forward to seeing you at the happy hour next week. I said, oh, you mean that group that's separate from the Federalist Society but conservative? He said, yes. And then I learned something I didn't know. They're to the right of the Federalist Society. These are students who associate with support of Donald J. Trump and want to yell at me about it for about an hour. And that's going to happen at 4:30 today. Now, hold on. I have a lot of preliminary things, and then I'll let you yell at me. First, I'm doing this in live. This is Pete Dominic's show at its best because I'm giving you real-time news live. I leave my house in an hour and 30 minutes to drive to the bar where I'm meeting these students. If it's all white males, if they are only white males in this organization, I will probably say, give me your best 10 minutes and then walk out. And I will explain that professionally, if I'm invited to conferences that only have white males on the panel, I don't go. That's been my position now for a while. There has to be at least one woman or one person of color or I'm not showing up. So there's a chance none of the fireworks will happen. But let's assume this is a group of non-white people and women or some combination of that. Here's the question I have for your audience. And my blog post on this is coming out tomorrow morning. What does a law professor do with students who are in Trump's or who are in Trump's favor? Because if I could, Pete, this student and I after class had a 30-minute conversation It's really important to hear what he said. I went through somewhere between 15 and 20 Trump disasters in almost in chronological order. His father and him getting sued by the federal government in 1971 and 2 for civil rights violations in their apartments. The horrificness of the Central Park Five. And for the audience that doesn't know, Trump called these 5 black kids guilty after they were conclusively proved innocent. Okay. The 90s, the Russians bail him out. We have Rosie O'Donnell being a fat pig. We have January 6th. We have 10 other things I mentioned, all grabbing pussy, everything.
I love your shorthanding of all these. Yeah.
After each incident, he would say something like, well, that's mostly true, but I have a different perspective on it. And I said, fine, let's just get through them. When I got through all of them, this is what he said, Pete. And I want to be serious for 1 second. This is what he said, and it's a very serious thing. He said, he's 30 years old. He's an older student. He said, Professor Segall, you don't understand us. I said, I assumed by us he meant Trumpers. I said, who's us? He said, people who are disaffected under 30. I said, or 30 or under. I said, talk to me. He said, we think it all has to come down. We think America is broken. We think America is absolutely broken in fundamental ways. And the only way that we're going to improve this country is to tear all the institutions down. And the only person with that message, he says, is Donald Trump. And then he says, none of us think he's a good person. None of us would want him to watch our children. None of us think that he has a character that we should emulate in public. But he is the only politician of the last 30 years, basically. I think he's wrong about this. So I think Bernie Sanders has a side to him that's like this. But he said he's the only politician who wants it, who sees it for what it is. Politics is bullshit. We've got to tear it all down. Now, Pete, that's not, Trump can't be the messenger for that. But that message from a young person, I'm not going to say is inappropriate or illegitimate or anything else. Young people are supposed to be angry. They're supposed to be mad. But I did say, but the messenger is so bad. You'll never accomplish your goals with that messenger. His answer was, first we tear it down, then we worry about it.
Then we worry about it.
Wasn't that interesting? And now, in an hour, I'm going to talk about a bunch of students who feel this way. I don't know what to do. You have any advice?
Oh, boy. Well, first of all, I would say, as someone who wants to hear that conversation, like, I want you to tape it. Second of all, I think that it's interesting to draw a Trump supporter out into the arguments of con law. That's interesting to me because I would imagine a Trump supporter generally doesn't know about constitutional law. They've learned everything they know about it from Mark Levin or somebody that talks that way on the radio.
The Mark Levin interview with Donald Trump yesterday or 2 days ago was one of the biggest pieces of shit I've ever seen.
Yeah, it was like watching 2 garbage cans speak to each other. Yeah. But if they are in law school, so they know a thing or two about constitutional law, I would be interested in the Trump supporting law students argument with you, specifically with you. But finally, when you said that you don't understand Professor Segall, my knee-jerk reaction to those types of responses from right-wing conservatives is I understand pretty well. Like, you're not going to teach me anything. You're not going to teach me too many things new, except that you have been fed this narrative, and I generally understand it. But I feel a little bit humbled or corrected because if his idea is that people under age of 30 on the right think they should tear it all down, you've got me on the hook. I want to know what you mean by that, what that looks like in your life, in my life, in reality. What does that mean? I've always heard revolutionaries, as you mentioned, on the left and on the right, talking about tearing it down and rebuilding it. But it's never, maybe when I was younger, more idyllic. But as I got older and had mentors with people like you, I realized life isn't that simple. And it's pragmatic. And you can look back in history at all the revolutions. They generally didn't happen just like that. And the ones that we've seen tried in our lifetime haven't really been very successful in many ways. And so what does it mean to tear it all down? I do want to hear a young person's point of view, especially if they're talking to you. But I would ask them the most pragmatic question, like, well, do you want to have kids? Where are you going to put your kid in school? Like, what does it mean to tear it all down? And finally, it sounds very much like this group and this idea is very in line with this Project 2025. And so I think that's probably what they want to say.
Thank you. That's all very helpful. The last thing you said is so interesting to me. So I don't know yet. I will report back. But the student I talked to after class last week, I think he's, this is the amazing thing. I actually think he's socially liberal. My prediction, I don't know yet, but my prediction is, Pete, he is pro-choice. My prediction is he's pro-legalization of drugs. Of course, so is Trump, I think. I think he's going
Yeah, so get very specific if that's his case and be like, if you want to tear it all down, are you talking about government, local, state? Are you talking about federal government? What institutions are you talking about? What do you want to do? Would you like to see the CDC be replaced with the FDA? How about the Department of Defense? If you were in charge of their budget, what would it be? Like, tell them, put them in that position.
Ask all those questions. That's great. Yep. Do you agree with me that if it's all, what do I do if it's all white male?
Oh, I would always follow your lead on that, but I would engage them and I would probably ask them why they think there are no women or people of color that are subscribing.
Can you fly down? I'm meeting them in 2 hours. Can you fly down?
I mean, do you have any friends? Tell me about the friends that are law students that are women or people of color, and why aren't they here? Why do those groups generally not subscribe to their beliefs? Why are they underrepresented? I just saw the slate of Republicans running in my local state and town on one pamphlet. There was like 8 guys, all white guys, and Pete, it's just like
Lynn. My wife Lynn had a friend visiting this week from your part of the country. She's not exactly where you're from, but she's near Sleepy Hollow. How far is that from you?
Not far at all. It's right across the Tappan Zee Bridge from me.
But she lives next to Sleepy Hollow in some other town. She told me, Pete, that like 70% of the people in her town are pro-Trump.
Yeah, that makes sense. That tracks.
That was astonishing. In 1 hour from New York City. 1 hour from New York City.
Well, 1 hour from New York City is where the people that their parents were terrified of black people, so they moved, but they want to be close to the city.
Okay, fair enough. All right. So this whole thing with the students today, I think, is fun and interesting, and I'm going to do my best to be both professors, to be both kind of, supportive of the endeavor of trying to understand each other, because that's my job. But I'm not going to, if they start talking sexism and racism, I'm not going to stand for it. So we'll see what happens. I think my obligation as a law professor, given they're my current students, is different than if I was a friend or a family member or an interviewer or a podcast host or whatever. I do have to keep it. I mean, I'm going to keep in mind that I have a responsibility to these students that transcends normal conversations. But they know who I am. They invited me because they know I'm going to react very badly to what they say. And I'm going to tell the truth as I see it. But I'm mostly going to listen.
I also would be interested. I'm interested in watching a new audience read or hear your philosophy on the court, its role in it not being a court. And I'm always like, to me, it would be like, giving them some of the classic Segall dusting and watching their reaction at those theories. Let them defend the power or lack of the Supreme Court or any other court. Right. Let them talk about what they think the judicial branch should be. And, most importantly, maybe let them, talk about history and where they think the founding fathers wanted. I mean, I think those histories are fascinating to learn the truth about what they believed and so on. I'm always talking to those authors, many of which have been recommended to me by you. So I'd be interested in hearing what they know or don't know about, or maybe just narrow it down on one of the Segallisms. Let's just talk about, the Warren Court and what they thought about guns and when everything changed.
Yes. The first thing you said, it's turning out.
Second Amendment.
It's turning out that I'm just going to brag. Sorry. Look at me, Louis moment. Over the last month, I have been shocked at the number of non-lawyers, non-law professors, non-Pete Dominic fans, that I always check, who have repeated to me my theory the court is not a court. I never thought that idea. I told Lynn when I wrote the book, I just want this to be something that's not ridiculed and taken seriously by some people who don't like the Supreme Court. Being part of the conversation would be nice. I'm not sure it's going to happen to me, but that's my goal. I'm never going to convince anyone, but my goal is to get this to be part of the conversation. Pete, it's amazing to me how that has spread. And it really, and your show has done a lot of that. So most of the time, it's because of people either who are law professors or lawyers.
I think the circumstances of America and the world did a lot of it. The world met you where you'd been for a long time.
Yes.
America.
Yes. Anyway, so that's kind of a nice feeling. So you're right. So these guys, I'm sure, think I'm pro-choice and pro-Roe versus Wade. So when they brag about Trump reversing Roe versus Wade, and I say, well, okay, but I wanted Roe versus Wade reversed. that will make them, because they're viewing me as a stereotypical progressive.
Right. Yeah.
Anyway, so all of that is, I'm sorry if it bored your audience. I hope it didn't. All of that is very personal to me. The second thing I want to talk about, though, affects everybody and is a major thing. It's happening all over social media. It happened to me. Once again, I got killed by Twitter, destroyed by Twitter. I almost left Twitter yesterday. I came very close to it. I came within 10 minutes of tweeting off, saying, see y'all in 2 months. I was so upset. Like 3 days ago, well, that's not true. Last week, I noticed that the New York Times' op-ed pages, not the editorial page, which is the New York Times' where they put their views forward, but the op-ed pages, plus their news coverage, I have found extremely offensive by New York Times standards. They had a op-ed about Harris's performance at the interview on CNN, and it was a very negative op-ed, and that's fine, I guess. But the picture of her made her look like a dark, devilish demon from hell, and the picture was uncalled for. The picture was unjustified and just made her look evil, and there was no reason to put that picture. But there's been a series of op-eds. One headline was, Trump can win the election on judgment, or something like, on character, something like that. I mean, just insane headlines. So I pointed out a couple, and I tweeted, I've had 6 op-eds in the New York Times in my life, and I tweeted, I'm a big fan of this paper, but what are they doing? Like, none of this makes sense to me. And then on one of the particularly heinous ones, I think it was the picture of Harris, I tweeted out, had the New York editors been kidnapped? I don't understand what's happening here. It feels like they've taken both sidesism to an extreme, and they're not portraying Trump as he needs to be portrayed. So that happens, and everybody loves me. I'm Twitter hero. Then, to my great surprise, a New York Times person who works in the op-ed section of the paper confronts me directly on Twitter. Now, this guy, the last time I talked to this human being was 2016. In 2016, 8 years ago, he wrote me. The only time the New York Times has ever solicited me. He wrote me and said, you've been going around the world saying we should freeze the Supreme Court at 4 Republicans and 4 Democrats, 4 liberals, 4 conservatives. Now that Scalia is dead, will you write that up for us? And I was like, are you kidding? The New York Times? Of course. So that was really nice of him 8 years ago. That's the last time I talked to him. So he comes on Twitter and he says, what are you talking about? We run a balance. We had positive things about the television interview. We had negative things about we've run incredibly negative things about Donald Trump. Our editorial page has been very clear. He shouldn't be president. What are you talking about? Blah, blah, blah. So he did that. People started attacking him in that kind of thread. He then wrote me privately, and we had a huge offline exchange about this. It was an hour of text messages back and forth. And what he convinced me of during that hour was this is more complicated than I originally thought. I'm not saying he convinced me. I'm saying it's more complicated than he originally thought. And how to cover Trump in the age of how the media should cover Trump is a very complicated question, which we'll get to in a minute. So that happens. I go back on Twitter and I say, well, I've had a long discussion now with the Times guy. I said he didn't convince me. Could not be more clear. He didn't convince me, but he made some good points that I should think about. And now I think maybe the issue is more complex than I originally thought. There have been only negative responses to that tweet, and there have been hundreds.
How many of those responses are from people you know and find worthwhile?
Very few. But it's really annoying. But anyway, so that's the Twitter.
Well, I think, just to be your friend and to be an observer on the outside, it's like I generally respect any point of view that I always respect pretty much every point of view you have. I mean, I've had my disagreements with you, and and we've had our little quarrels about things, but I would things are nuanced and things are complicated. And so if you have a strong opinion, you, Eric Segall, have a strong opinion, and then you have a conversation with anybody about anything, including whether or not cyclists should be allowed on the roads.
No! They should not.
Ideas that you have had. And you come away with it with some nuance because, say, you talk to a cyclist or a person who rides bikes, and I'm interested in what changed. I'm interested in what you learned because I know you and I respect you, but that's not what social media is. So if someone that you knew and respected, had a harsh opinion, I would consider that. But if it's nobody, then it's just a bunch of people who, I think one of the things that is very hard for liberal, progressive Trump haters to understand is too many of us have completely given up on any kind of nuance because that's how social media makes us think. Everything must be binary. I see this constantly from progressives I like. It's either this or that. I traffic in it from time to time on social media, but I host a long form radio discussion. And so I think generally speaking, we should realize that things are a little bit more complex. And if we have a conversation and change the nature of our views, that's a good thing. And that's what you've always done and taught me to do.
I didn't come back and say, oh, you know what? The Times is great. He convinced me. Yeah. I actually said he didn't persuade me, but now I'm thinking about it a little bit differently. That's all.
Well, anyway, is there any way, have you talked about, or is there any way to talk about that?
So I will say a distinct minority of the hate were people who said, well, explain why you find it complex. Explain what he said to you that made it difficult.
Sure.
And then to most of the people who said that politely, a lot of people said it meanly, but to the people who said it politely, I said, I'm writing it up and you'll see it someplace. So I did. So what happened was, a friend of mine from Twitter, who I've never met, followed all of this. He sent me a draft op-ed he had been working on, which was more pro-New York Times, which was more anti-coverage than my current position is. But it was pretty good. He said, you want to work on this together and submit it to the Times? And I said, let me see if I can put enough of my work into it. It's pretty good to justify a co-authorship. But also, we do disagree a little bit. So anyway, I worked on it for hours, rewrote it, sent it back to him. He sent it back to me. And we submitted it to the New York Times today. They're not going to the guy I was talking to. He's not going to take it because it's a very difficult thing for the Times to talk about. But in writing the op-ed and drafting it and editing it and looking at his work and thinking about it, because he was more anti than I was, Pete, I do think this is an issue that requires a lot of attention. How does the American media cover Donald Trump? The answer is simply not they suck and it's killing us and we're going to die. That's not the right answer. My initial view was I understand why a paper like the New York Times has and the reporters who work there and the editorialists who work there, the op-ed people who submit to it. I understand the idea of, both sides is normally good. If there are two sides, the Times feels like it should present both sides, if there are two sides. And after another hour-long discussion last night with the New York Times guy, I think we came down to this point of disagreement. But my position is I'm not sure. I'm not sure. But
you've been...
hold on, let me make the last point. Then what I said to him was, I view Donald Trump as Hitler without the means. In other words, we're not living in 1934 Germany. We didn't go through World War I. This is not Germany. So the context is completely different. But what motivated Hitler? What motivated him to want to take over the world and kill 10 million people? His motivation for power and leadership is indistinguishable from Trump's motivations. The only thing stopping Trump from doing that is he can't. But Trump has no moral limit. If he wants something, he would kill 10 million Americans to get it if he wanted it. And so I said to the New York Times guy, you can't both sides that. There is no both sides that. I will say that he and others have responded to me. We think he's terrible. We think he's the absolute worst. If we disagree with you that he's Hitler, that can't be a point of contention because that's stupid. And that's fair. That's a fair argument back. But he also said, and this is what I want to ask you about, Pete. What I'm still wrestling with, and I didn't really make peace with in this op-ed, is what do we do with the 70 million Americans who voted for him? What does the Times do with that? So my op-ed says there's two issues. Capitalism, The Times has to make a profit. If they publish their paper in a way where they lose money, it doesn't work. This is not the old days when CBS, ABC, and NBC, I don't know if your audience knows this, they deliberately and intentionally took losses in their news departments. That no longer is a thing. So that's one thing. But what do we do with those 70 million people? Like, how do we deal with that when the New York Times is saying we can't ignore those people? We just can't say they're all wrong. Saying they're all wrong isn't the answer. And I have to say that gave me hesitation. It did.
Well, I need a little bit more specifics. It's still a bit vague in terms of, what you're nitpicking, what the argument was. It wasn't nitpicking, just the overall.
My argument is the time and everything. So he said to me, should we not cover Harris negatively if people think she's done things that are wrong or bad or that could make her a better candidate? I said, no. If you think Harris had a bad day or you're going to criticize her policies, but you can always criticize her policies. But whatever you do between now and November 8th, whenever the election is, if you're going to run a piece, Harris is terrible for these reasons. What I want is a disclaimer. I want a disclaimer at the top of the op-ed saying, we believe in covering both sides of issues, but our editorial page has been very clear. This newspaper thinks that America cannot withstand a second Trump presidency. We don't want him elected. We want Harris elected. I want that disclaimer on every positive Trump piece and every negative Harris piece.
Well, that would be.
I think America wants that. I do.
That's an interesting and I would imagine unprecedented editor's note.
I don't know if it's unprecedented. So he sent me, for a good reason, the July, I think it's July 11th. Don't quote me on that, people. The editorial, the New York Times, the people who run the Times, they published a thing in July, early July, that is as anti-Trump as anything I've ever seen. It's beautifully done. It goes through his entire evils, all the stuff he's terrible on, and it makes it clear that the Times wants him to leave politics forever. It makes it clear. So now the question becomes, once the newspaper has taken that position, are they then, as a good journalistic thing, supposed to publish pro-Trump op-eds or anti-Harris op-eds? And my view is, in 99.9% of the time, of course, if it's Romney and Obama, you should probably be close to evenly split. If it's Kennedy and Nixon, that's a very different choice, but it's not a better country choice.
Yeah,
this
but
is a better country choice.
Yeah, you said a lot of, I think, almost too fair-minded things. It's interesting to think about the New York Times or any other independent outlet that, some big Substack, Heather Cox Richardson or Aaron Rupar's Public Notice or Judd Legum, they're all individual. They're just one person. Some of them have editors. And I think we definitely need the corporate media, certainly the traditional newspapers and so on that have editors and practice journalistic ethics and so on. But, when you say Trump is Hitler without the this or that, I mean, my reaction editorially, journalistically, I suppose, is if I want to know if someone today is like Hitler, the best place to go is to historians who study fascism, who study Hitler himself. And all of them say the same thing.
That was very good. That was a Segall rant. That was good. I like that.
And if anything, you put a note, Donald Trump is a 4 times convicted or 39, his legal, the insurrection, the rape, the number. People never talk about, they always talk about E. Jean Carroll and that conviction because it's a conviction.
It wasn't a conviction. It wasn't a conviction. It was a civil law.
Civil litigation, civil trial.
He was found liable.
Right. But I mean, if you or I were accused of sexually harassing 2 women, being as public as we are, it would be in every single article about us. Over 20 women accused him. I would include that in every single editorial, just like any person would include it when they introduced their coworker to the boss. Oh, by the way, that's Mike. He harasses everybody. Like, the public should know that. And a few other things about Donald Trump, I suppose. And in terms of, that's all I've got to say about the comments you made in the coverage of Trump.
You did not address what I want you to address. I really want your opinion on it. What does a corporation, it's a corporation, it's a business, like the New York Times or the Washington Post or CNN, all 3 are doing the same thing. They're all acting the same way. what should they do given the fact that 73 or 4, whatever it was, million people voted for this man, and the fact that polls show, it's going to be at least 50, 60, or 70 million again, somewhere in that name. What do they do with that fact? It's a fact.
Well, there's a certain amount of credence and attention you give to the public and your readers or your listeners to your show, but you still have to cover it in a way that is fair and objective and in the public's interest. So I'm not sure.
In the public's interest. Is it New York Times' job to guard the public interest?
It's journalists' job to write what's in the public interest in any article and who does this impact? Who is reading this? Why should
the journalist's job is to make money?
No, I don't agree with that. I think that's the job of the business part of the New York Times, but I don't think it's the job of the journalist. I don't think the journalist is going to be persuaded by focusing on people and issues that people will click on and matter. And they're going to have to compromise to a certain extent, maybe with the title of their article or the length of it and so on, because the nature of things have changed. But I don't think the main primary interest in anyone writing an article, or even me, is if my only interest is making money, then I would not do the show I do. I think that the only reason I make money and have subscribers is because of the way I do the show, the way I do. I probably could do a lot better if I was more outrageous and lied and more performative.
I wouldn't be on your show, so that's one thing. Do you agree that? I guess I want to ask this question. Do you? Should they? If they're going to publish critical things of Harris, even things you and I would agree, we wish Harris was. I wish she was, frankly, a little bit more criminal defense oriented. I wish that. As a liberal, I would like her to be more criminal defense oriented.
And less prosecutor.
And less prosecutor.
Yeah.
I'm a little worried about her judges, for example. Is she going to appoint prosecuting judges? That's what Republicans have done forever. That's what we've done forever until Biden. Biden's the first president ever to appoint public defender judges. It's great. So if they're going to do that, so you agree with me. That's fine. And after November, and if she wins, then do it as much as you want. But until she wins, if you're going to do that, remind the audience that as important a critique as this is, it doesn't adjust the bottom line, which is she must be elected and Trump must not be elected. And that's the position of this organization.
Yeah, I mean, the bottom line is if only one of these candidates will allow us to continue to write critical pieces about them if they are elected.
I said
one of these candidates thinks that the journalists and the press are the enemy of the people, which is certainly something that fascists believe.
It's really interesting. You know what's also happening, Pete, that's not part of this conversation? I have two more things I want to talk about before we finish. One is Elon Musk. Because, first of all, you and I know, your audience knows, that somewhere between 3 months and a year from today, he and Trump will hate each other. That's what always happens to Trump. It'll happen with Elon Musk. We all know this. But the question is, how much damage is going to be done?
Everyone that gets close to Trump eventually hates him. His kids, his wives, his cabinet secretaries.
Except for the people who need him. Except for the people who need him monetarily. Those people stay. But
but they still hate him.
Fair enough. But everyone else leaves. Right. He's enemies with every. I saw the graph on TikTok of the chart of how many of his former cabinet level people have spoken out against him. It's like 85%.
Yeah.
It's crazy. But okay, so I'm sorry. Yeah, and I lost my train of thought.
Elon Musk,
right. Elon Musk is pointing out accurately, actually, that in England and some other places, there are some free speech things. Now, so I am the least free speech protective American law professor. I am, Pete. I am the least protective free speech American law professor. There are people tied with me, but no one is less than me. I believe in Europeans' view of free speech, which is much less than ours. But England is putting people in jail for Facebook posts. Germany has done some crazy things. Musk is pointing all of this out correctly, but tying it to that's what Harris is going to do. We're going to become like England and put people in jail for Facebook posts. And that is exactly 180 degrees from the truth. Harris is your typical law professor who believes free speech is everything. It is Donald Trump who's a threat to freedom of speech. And so my question to you is,
But just to be clear, it is not a hypothetical. And this is the thing that bothers me so much when it comes to politics. When we talk about political correctness and censorship, it is not a hypothetical. I think that the most obvious form of censorship and attacks on free speech are the banning of books. And Republicans are doing this throughout the country. They're doing it. It's part of the plan. It's part of the platform. So you don't have to speculate who will do it. They are currently doing it.
100%. And thank you for saying that. That was helpful. You're right. The audience needs to know. But I don't think Elon Musk is in favor of burning books. And I know Donald Trump doesn't care one way or the other. The only thing Donald Trump cares about is getting elected or power and money. So the question is, why does Musk think, if he thinks, that free speech is more endangered by a Harris presidency than a Trump presidency, which is an insane position to take? And I realized what it was, Pete, and it was a big moment for me, because for Musk, it really is all about the money. And I think he thinks he'll have a competitive advantage in a world that is much more free speechy than we even are today, compared to England and other places in Europe and Brazil and other places where he feels free speech is threatened. I still think, though, that if you put him under oath and said, who's more likely to shut you down someday? Shut you down completely, Harris or Trump? The answer is Trump. Harris would never do that. She comes from a tradition of free speech.
Well, I'm actually, you can make one more point about this, but I'm slightly uninterested in what Elon thinks. I think it matters what he thinks a lot, because he's one of the most influential people in the world. Yes. But I also think that it's not, we shouldn't spend a lot of time trying to unpack it, because it's not a good faith argument. It's all about manipulation and his own insecurities. Yeah. He's clearly got some real serious mental issues and narcissism issues. And so we trying to get to the root of why he thinks it, I think, or other people think what they do, is not a great exercise, because it's not in good faith. He doesn't actually think those things. He's just saying them. It's not unlike Mark Levin or people who've been doing it on the Rush Limbaugh. They're just saying them to make money. Tucker Carlson, Alex Jones. Why would Alex?
I was hoping, Pete, that Musk as a businessman was different than those people, but he's not. You're right.
Well, no, he's an insidious and awful person.
So let's move on.
Everybody knows him, specifically his own family.
And for those of you in your audience, and there has to be at least 5 who follow the Dan Lebitard show, let's give kudos to Stugatz, who predicted this 5 years ago, 10 years ago. Always hated Elon Musk. Always took him down. He was ahead of the curve on this. All right, last thing, Pete.
Bill Boyle, too, here on our show.
DC. Good job, Bill from DC, who I met once in the park on bikes. Pete, I want to crowdsource something with your audience, and we're all in this together. So I need help. Help! The Brennan Center is this fantastic organization that is housed in NYU Law School, that is a very progressive organization that does a lot of fantastic work on criminal defense issues, which I don't get involved in very often, as you know. But free speech, freedom, just from the progressive perspective, civil rights, liberal rights. We don't agree. They and I don't agree on judicial review, on judicial involvement and all that. But on the merits of every single issue, we agree on everything, because we're all progressive. They called me a few weeks ago and asked me if I'd meet with them. And I met with them last week, a couple weeks ago, virtually. And they have a lot of money now, Pete. They have a lot of money. And what they're doing is they want to start a public project of national conferences, speakers, to get into the public sphere an alternative to originalism. They think this whole notion of originalism, even outside of law schools, outside of law professors, outside of talk shows like yours, this whole notion of originalism is so backwards, so wrong, so hurtful. So just mentally, it is so painful that we would go back to a time when people were slaves and black people were segregated and women couldn't vote and women were property of their husbands. It's such an offensive idea all the way down that they really want to combat the Federalist Society's originalism through a well-funded public campaign, which is awesome. And they want me directly involved in it. I'm very happy about all that. Very excited about it. I said to them towards the very end, I have two controversial things about this, though. One is most important. I will not do this unless we have a slogan or a 3-word description or a marketing tool, because that's what a guy named Jamal Green at Columbia Law School wrote an article about originalism a long time ago, which was titled "The Selling of Originalism." It's a beautiful article, and it explains how originalism became a thing that Sunday morning conservative talk shows would talk about, and how and Mark Levin would talk about it, and people on the right, Sean Hannity would talk about it, and so on and so forth. It's an amazing piece. We need the selling of the alternative to originalism, but we need a slogan, we need a statement, we need a brand. Tweet me. We need something like originalism sucks, but that's not it, obviously. We need a positive message about the court. And let me be clear. I said to them, if we ever get the court back, we meaning the left, meaning you guys, if the court ever gets back, and it will someday, to being populated by liberals and progressives, you and I are going to disagree on everything, you, the Brennan Center, because you're going to want Roe back and you're going to want all these liberal cases, and I'm going to want the court to stand down. I'm going to the court to get out of politics so we can do politics the democratic way. So we may disagree on that. If that's a problem, tell me now. They said, no, we're coming along to your point of view on that, which shocked me.
Wow.
They're not there, but they're coming along to my point of view on that. But the real thing is, for your audience, send me ideas. We need a slogan to combat originalism that appeals to non-lawyers, that appeals to the public. Engage people in the public, but not lawyers.
Can you give me a little bit more of what you're talking about, like a slogan?
So, we want the court to so the right side of America's political equation has put their money behind the idea that judges need to use text and history, originalism, to decide cases today, because anything else gives judges too much discretion and they make the law instead of interpreting the law.
Right.
What everyone who's sophisticated knows is that none of that is true, that originalism gives the Supreme Court as much or more discretion than not using originalism, that history never helps. Even when it helps, we probably shouldn't use it. It's a very bad tool, but mostly it's by definition an anti-progressive tool because it's looking backwards. We want to go back to 1868 and back to 1791 to figure out difficult issues today, which is stupid, immoral, unfair to most of our population, and so on and so forth. But they found a word, one word, to convey an idea. The court's doing too much. It's too liberal. It's too progressive. Go backwards. Go back to the good old days. We need a word or up to 5 or 8 words that convey a forward-looking idea of what we want the court to do. That's not tied to the past. Does that make sense?
It makes sense, and I hope that people understand what you're asking, and we'll submit ideas. We could talk more about this at a hangout. I think it's a fascinating idea and issue, and it's a really exciting initiative, and great to know that the Brennan Center has this kind of budget. Are they in touch with our friend Alex Aronson?
I mentioned him during that meeting. It's interesting, if your audience is interested. What I said to them also, which I think is absolutely right, is I said, before this can get off the ground, you need people more famous, obviously, than me. And so I suggested a couple really famous liberals, Erwin Chemerinsky being one, who everyone who follows law knows. And I said, they don't have to work with us. We just need their support. So once you get their support, then you get people like me. I don't know what's going to happen to this project, but it's very exciting, and I'm really flattered to be asked to contribute. And I think there'll be ways, Pete, that maybe we can get your show involved, possibly, in this. Especially being a New York show, which you are, and they're at NYU.
Well, they're looking for somebody who can turn around amazing interviews and podcasts in the shortest amount of time and get them up for a wide range of audience. Maybe I'm your guy in a way that everybody can digest. That's great, man. Well, I think you have to go. Do you have to go?
I have to go in 5 minutes.
Okay. Was there any other things you wanted to discuss or pitch?
I think there is. Okay. I just want to go back to the Trump conversation, and I want to talk to the portion of your audience that thinks that something that I might think, but I'm not sure that I think, which is no, it's not. This is not the time for fairness. This is not the time for both sidism. This is the time for the Times to say we unequivocally have to have not Donald Trump be president. And I just want to point out that although I agree with that, obviously, it's not easy to make that decision when 70 million Americans voted for it. It's just not. Maybe it's the right choice. Maybe it is. I'm 60-40 that it is the right choice. But for people who've canceled their subscriptions to the Times over this issue, which dozens of people claim they have, I think that is a mistake. Only for this reason. If I were the king of the New York Times, I don't know exactly what I would do. I think it's complicated. I think it's nuanced. And I think, and one point that I think is really important is I'm not even sure the most effective strategy is to tell 70 million people they're stupid. Like, I'm not even sure that's the most effective strategy. Maybe the strategy is to say, well, you have valid points here and valid points there. On balance, it's not close, but your views are respected by us, and we're going to promote them. Don't forget our bottom line, which the Times has been clear about. Time probably runs 5 anti-Trump things to every 1 anti-Harris. From what I've looked, it's like 5-1, 7-1. So we know where they stand. So I want to tell the many Twitter followers who got mad at me or Twitter people and other people thinking about this. It's going to get worse as the election comes close. This is a big issue. It's not an easy choice to make for a for-profit.
Just like of the people who voted for Donald Trump, how many of them do you think read or subscribe to the New York Times? Why does it matter? They're not buying. Why doesn't Honda cater to people who don't buy cars? Like, they're not buying the product. Why should they?
I think what the New York Times is. This is not from my friend. This is me extrapolating. I think what the New York Times' position is, they're not looking at today or next month. They're looking at the long term.
Yeah.
And in the long term, their brand is fairness, which is impossible.
If the brand is fairness, then they just cover Trump fairly and accurately.
That's what people say. But I'm
and the editorials are different than the news department. The opinions are different than So I also think, let me just, I am of the belief that the legacy media, if you will, these institutions that have been here for a long time, the newspapers and some of the cable networks, are not long for this world. They're bleeding money in a lot of ways. I'd love to be wrong, because I think they're necessary and important. I think all of us are just linking to much of what they're reporting, especially in foreign and international and more specialty sections that can't be funded as well. But, listen, if you've got a guy who has a Substack and he's making a fortune and his whole thing is to write about a specific banking tool, you're going to have somebody that's going to be able to cover almost every sector of our society and profit from it. And I think you're going to see more Substack, more self-funded independent journalists on YouTube.
I'm already saying that in my profession, Pete, that has become Steve Laddick, Shadow Docket, has a Substack. Chris Geidner, who covers the court, has a Substack.
Mark Elias is as important of a resource as anybody in election law and politics, I would imagine. And he's making a shitload of money, I would guess, for his organization, and hopefully worth every penny of it. But I think that's the future of journalism. And I think that when you have a huge umbrella, I mean, look at SiriusXM or CNN or many of these other institutions, many of which I've worked for. Like, I know how they fund. I know how they get around having to pay for things. I know. But eventually, I think you're just going to have 1,000 resources where there was one. I see that as where it's going, for better or for worse.
Well, you're on this one, my friend. You are the expert, and
there are people who follow these trends. I mean, it's also interesting. I've been following a lot because Ava's going into the entertainment industry, and I'm tangentially related to it and was fully into it. Watching Hollywood studios, television companies, they too are. Who's watching an hour-long drama versus 1,000 20-second TikToks? It's where your eyeballs go, and how you entertain yourself is changing. The types of movies and how they're funded. Everything is changing rapidly because of our ability and access to all have cameras, microphones, and platforms where we can post our shit.
Lynn said to some friends yesterday that since COVID, she's had outside of her teaching and her work, she has a really hard time reading books because she just kind of wants to be scrolling. And I think a lot of people are suffering from that. So I think and she wants to read short substacks, like you're saying. So I think that's what's happening. I do think, Pete, that if you're saying that the New York Times, Washington Post, and LA Times and Wall Street Journal are all kind of on their way out and all their way down, and maybe 30 years from now or 50 years from now or 10 years from now, none of them will exist in their current form. All that said, and I think I defer to you on all of those issues. I think all of that makes my arguments much stronger about how hard this is to navigate for them in this changing moment of time. That's all. So I wish more people would say, you know what? This is a hard question. I don't agree with the decision they made. If I was there, I would have made a different decision, but I'm not going to judge it because it was a reasonable decision in all the circumstances, and it's very difficult. And I feel like every time I say that, I get killed.
Well, I think the problem is that many of the people that are killing you are idiots and losers who don't know how journalism works and what the job is, and you know, making money is a part of the job. And you know, I always default to, there is a reason why right-wing media stars are stars, why they have millions and millions more listeners and viewers than progressives. There's a reason for it. And I think that it's important to understand what those reasons are. And the bottom line in this day and age, as Lynn has suffered, as you just mentioned, and I have as well, you want it shorter, faster, with less nuance. And our brains, that's not how you arrive at your decisions and your choices on important policies that are life and death, or that are, you know, livelihood or not. And so you have to understand that life is complicated, which is why you need to read a whole article where you hear a bunch of different takes on it. I mean, somebody like your work or Aaron Carroll's work, I want to read the whole article because it gives me a far more nuanced view. But the bottom line is nuance is dead. We want it fast and dirty, and so we can move on to the next thing.
And that's why I'll be retiring soon. I want to say congrats to Aaron Carroll. I saw that he was back with you and in the New York Times. Aaron's an old friend. We once wrote a large article together from Stanford, of all places, and it was good to see him.
And I'll be taping an interview with him Friday that'll air either over the weekend or next week. Thank you, my friend.
Please give him my best. Thanks, Pete.
All right, there he goes, Eric Segall, Eastman Segall on social media. Follow him on TikTok. Follow him on listen to the podcast, Supreme Myths. Get his books and support him all that you can. And thank you for all of your support of me this week. And I've got a whole bunch more that I'm going to be dropping tomorrow and the next day as well, it looks like, because I've got some great conversations with Jason Stanley, whose new book, Erasing History, How Fascists Rewrite the Past to Control the Future, and other constitutional scholar Kim Whaley and I sat down and talked about the power of the pardon and why it matters so much, especially if Trump gets reelected, and what that would contribute to a downfall of democracy. A really important conversation with her. And one of my favorite journalists and writers, Steve Bannon, and I caught up to talk about his new book, Ministry of Truth. Steve is simply one of the best, and I don't think he's ever been on the show, but I wasn't sure and I didn't want to say anything. But that's a great interview. So look for those three and more before Monday, possibly. And thank you so much for your support. You guys are the very best. Have a great weekend, bumblebees, and I'll be talking to you.
Up the window to let in some light. You gotta stand up. That's right. You got to rise up. You got to stand up. You gotta stare the devil straight in the eye. We got to let him know it's his turn to go. See it clear when all you hear is a lie. Don't get up off of your butt. Down off of your fence, even if it ain't a very friendly audience, well, they'll begin to listen when you start making sense, and you stand up, stand up. No need to point your rifle to defend your town, just stand up, stand up. You know they can't deny you what you're laying down, boy, you better stand up, stand up. Show your face of every color, yellow, black, red, and brown. She's the place where every lost child will finally be found. There's only one thing to do before we stand our ground, and that's stand up, stand up. Well, the founding fathers saw a land for all. They had to stand up, they had to stand up. They had a keen imagination for a crystal ball, drawing all the plans of stand up. But all they had to go on was the time they were in, with other causes for laws, and since they weren't even sin, they knew that change was gonna come before the change could begin. They had to stand up. All right, they had to stand up. We got to stand up. We got to look the devil square in the eye. We gotta let him know it's his time to go, and make it clear when all we hear is a lie. Where the money all went, it'll be the cost of freedom that'll go unspent. You can can see them flee the scene of that experiment. If you stand up, all right, we got to speak up, we got to reach up and raise your voice in every way you know how. Don't be toes up, you got to show up. Ain't no better time to do it but now. No need to pledge allegiance to no wanton tribe. Rise up, show obedience to the voice inside, and listen well and it'll tell you not to run and hide. It says stand